guys, this is X What If, and welcome back to part 6 of What If Yuji Was Like Yoriichi. I'm sorry I haven't been uploading lately. I've been busy with Christmas and everything, but I'm going to try to get things back on track. So without further ado, let's get right into this. As Tengen would introduce themselves, Yuki would question Tengen, asking why the tomb of the Star Corridor was closed off. Tengen would tell her that since they were unable to see into the human heart, they feared that Yuki could potentially be in alignment with Kenjaku. This is when Megami and Yuta would get to the point and ask about Kenjaku's objectives, and proceed to ask about how they would unseal Gojo from the prison realm. Tengen said they would provide the information on one condition: at least 2 of the 4 special grade people that were present must remain at the tomb and serve as their guard. Tengen would explain to them that Kenjaku wants to force the evolution of all people in Japan, telling the group that the method Kenjaku had chosen to force the evolution was on a massive scale, being as to merge Tengen with mankind. Tengen would tell the group that they could maintain self-control even after the evolution thanks to barrier techniques, but telling them that the world would end if mankind were to reach that state, and that they could not refuse the merger because their evolution had caused them to become more cursed spirit than human beings, telling them that it would make them a perfect target for cursed spirit manipulation. Tengen would also explain to the group that the star plasma vessel and the Six Eyes were connected by fate, but Kenjaku was defeated by 2 Six Eyes users in the past, which after Kenjaku's second defeat, he killed the star plasma vessel and the next Six Eyes user soon after they were born. He would then begin to explain to them about the Culling Games, Kenjaku's plan. He would tell them that the game is a ritual to prepare the people of Japan for the merger. He would explain the rules of the Culling Games to them, saying that the Culling Games could only end once all the players were dead, and there were rules in place to ensure that nothing could interrupt the ritual. He would tell them that Yuji's and the others' best course of actions are to spend 100 points to add rules where Sumiki and other unwilling participants can escape the game, noting that they would also need to free Gojo Satoru. They would pick their groups to serve as guards for Tengen, this being Yuki and Choso. After expressing their gratitude, Tengen would take out the back of the prison room, a cursed object that would be necessary for unsealing Satoru Gojo. He would tell them it serves as a back gate for the prison realm and was hidden by Tengen to try to conceal the existence of the front, but Kenjaku would have found it anyway. And since Kenjaku is the bearer of the front, he holds complete authority over the prison realm. He would then tell them that 1,000 years ago there was a female sorcerer who called herself Angel. She possessed a curse technique that could extinguish other curse techniques. Her name was Hana, and she had been incarnated as a Culling Game player. Tengen would then explain to them that Angel's technique would be necessary to open the back of the prison realm. Megami would ask if Tengen knows where Angel is, with Tengen telling Megami that he only knows that she's in the colony of the east side of Tokyo. As the group would go over the rules of the Culling Game, they would then decide that Yuki and Choso would remain at the Tomb of the Star to guard Master Tengen. Maki would return to the Zenin clan to collect cursed tools for the coming battles. Yuta would take part in the Culling Game right away to gather information long before Sumiki and the others participate, and Yuji and Megami's role would be to find Hakari in order to recruit him. Everyone agreeing and understanding what they had to do would move out, but before leaving the Tomb of the Star, Megami and Yuji would have gotten Hakari's location from Master Tengen. Hakari was making money as a bookie for an underground fight club located inside an abandoned parking garage.
As Yuji and Megami reach the parking garage, Megami tells Yuji they need to change clothes.
Yuji would ask why, and Megami would clarify that Hakari was suspended from Jujutsu High and he may not associate with them if he also realizes that they are students from Jujutsu High as well. He tells Yuji it might be a gray area to where they align, but to Hakari they might as well be Jujutsu higher-ups. Yuji would wonder if Hakari would even go with them, seeing as everything he's heard from all the others. And Megami is unsure either, given what all the upperclassmen had said about him. Regardless, both of them would say that they need his strength for the Culling Games. The duo will walk into the ground entrance to the abandoned parking garage and are met by a manager and a bodyguard. The security guard would tell them to get lost before he clobbers them, but Megami refuses to back down. The man would throw a strong right hook, but stop right before it hit Megami's face. But Megami doesn't flinch at all. The security guard would pull back his fist and tell Megami that rule number 1 was no one was supposed to say anything about the club. He would demand Megami to tell him, and say that he would beat him up after he spills the info. Megami would tell the guard that he didn't get the person's name before he killed him. It was a cocky sorcerer that had disappeared about a month ago. The manager would recall someone disappearing about a month ago, but is unable to verify. Megami would ask to take his place and threaten to lay the bodyguard flat on his face if they refuse. Yuji, realizing what Megami was doing, would simply stay silent, The manager would then get a message from the boss and get permission to add an additional fighter as for today's tournament. However, the only condition is that Yuji had to be selected as the fighter. Megami would claim that he has to fight, but he was just keeping up an act. He knows Yuji is perfectly suited for this job. The manager would then reveal that he didn't really like Megami and refuses to let him fight. Megami would then let out a long sigh, pretending that he didn't like the conditions, but then would reluctantly accept. They would leave together, and Yuji would tell Megami that bluffing was risky, with Megami disagreeing with him, saying that because it's a fight club that uses curse users, they must have frequent turnovers. Regardless of that, they were able to confirm that Hakari was around watching them through the cameras. The plan would be for Yuji to make contact with Hakari on the inside, while Megami would attempt to sneak in the parking garage from the outside. It would be risky because the fight club had already had their eyes on Megami, and if he was caught, they would begin to distrust Yuji as well. If anything, if they are caught, they could just use force to meet face to face with Hakari, but that would be a last resort. They just want to come in and ask Hakari for help and don't want to do anything that could damage their relationship early. The wisest course of action would be for Megami to stand by for the night while Yuji works his way onto Hakari on the inside. However, Megami is anxious and doesn't want to waste any time with Sumiki's deadline to participate in the culling game. Later that day, Yuji would return to the parking garage and meet with the security guard. He would prep Yuji by explaining the details of how the tournament works, stating that there are 2 rules, no retreating and no jujutsu. Yuji would be fine with people using curse techniques against him, but non-sorcerers wouldn't be able to see them. And the rule against running away is to ensure that the fight takes place where spectators can see. As Yuji would head downstairs towards the arena, he would recognize that all fights are all about entertaining the spectators. Yuji would ask what the boss was like. The bodyguard would then tell Yuji that he can only find that out when he meets him, and continue to explain more about the fights. There were 2 types of matches, scripted and unscripted, but an unscripted fight would likely get the boss's attention. Yuji would arrive at the fighting area. It was a section of the garage where the upper floor had mostly been removed. Yuji would be introduced to his opponent, with him going up against no one other than Panda. Yuji and Panda would work together to put on a show that entertains everyone. While they would trade fake blows with one another, Yuji and Panda would have a conversation to exchange information. As they finished exchanging information, Panda would signal him to finish the fight, where Yuji would land a powerful body shot to Panda, with Panda selling an over-the-top reaction. Yuji would be declared the winner, leaving a lasting impression on everyone watching. Hakari in the back somewhere would admit that he's impressed with Yuji. He would call one of his managers and tell him to bring Yuji to his office. He wanted to strike while the iron was hot and write scripts for Yuji's future fights, with Kirara telling Hakari that it sounds dumb. The man on the phone would then ask Hakari what he wants to do about the other brat. Hakari had planned to have Kirara keep an eye on him and tells his manager to stay vigilant. In the background, Megami would team up with Panda to infiltrate the fight club from the outside. They would put together a plan to ensure that Yuji's meeting with Hakari goes interrupted, but they understand that the other third year, Kirara, could thwart their plot at any moment. Meanwhile, inside the monitor room, Hakari meets up with Yuji for the first time. He would ask Yuji if he believed him if he said that he could work 1 hour a day and make 1 million yen a month. Unsure of what to say, Yuji would just sit there with a confused look on his face. Confused, Yuji would ask what he would need to do, but Hakari would tell him for that information he would need to pay 200,000 yen. Yuji would tell Hakari that he wouldn't agree to something like that because it's shady, with Hakari pointing out that there were a lot of people that would still fall for it. He believed that it all has to do with the fever. People get high on fever and make foolish choices, but people can't even fall in love without it. Hakari would say that he loves the fever and asks Yuji if he knows the most direct way of engaging with it. Yuji would take a guess and say that it was gambling. Hakari would smile and point out that life itself is a gamble. Society tramples on losers who don't know when to quit, but Hakari points out that everyone gambles. It's just that what people hate is losing and going to ruin. This is when Yuji would state that some people just want to live peacefully, with Hakari saying that he had never met anyone like that. Hakari wanted to use the fever to control the entire country using his fight club. Since the existence of cursed spirits had been made public and changes of Jujutsu regulations were inevitably coming, Hakari wanted to take advantage of this and expand his business. With being excited for the future, Hakari would tell Yuji that he needs strong allies and asked him if he wanted to get high on the fever with him. Just as Yuji was about to answer, they would be interrupted by a phone call. Just then, Hakari would offer Yuji a drink, but Yuji would decline because he's underage. Hakari would then bring up that Gojo couldn't drink either, but Yuji would pretend to not know who Gojo was. This would be suspicious to Hakari because there's not one sorcerer who doesn't know who Gojo was. Hakari would take the drink and chug it. Just as he would put the drink down, he would ask Yuji if he was a spy from Jujutsu High. But just before Yuji would be able to say anything, Hakari would toss the drink glass right at his face. Yuji would dodge the cup, but Hakari would activate his curse technique. It would summon 2 sliding doors that would attempt to close Yuji within them. Yuji would jump above the doors and try to speak to Hakari. However, Hakari would continue to attack. He would tell Yuji that a call from Kirara usually means something is amiss. Yuji would ask Hakari to just listen, but he would refuse because now his fever is running cold. As Megami and Panda would be outside confronting Kirara, the fight would go on as regular, with Megami doing a little bit better since he's stronger. However, he would still let Kirara go and ask them to listen because there is no time. They would be confused as why Megami would release them, but Kirara would decide to believe him and agree to listen. Just then, the monitor room door would suddenly come flying, and Hakari would be along with it. Megami would notice that Hakari had been hit outside of the room, and Yuji would walk outside, telling Megami and Panda to stay out of it. Hakari would get up, irritated and pissed off, believing that Yuji was underestimating him, as they would engage in hand-to-hand combat. Hakari was strong, for sure. However, Yuji had the edge in this fight. In a split second, Hakari would allow himself to get hit, tanking Yuji's punch. This would throw Yuji off guard, seeing that he wasn't expecting Hakari to tank that attack. In the confusion, Hakari would then immediately throw a devastating punch that would smash Yuji's face and send him reeling across the roof, but Yuji would land on his feet before completely falling to the ground. Hakari would then begin to flare up his cursed energy, with Kirara telling him to wait and listen, saying that they only just wanted to help. Hakari would stop for a second and say that he'll listen, but ask Yuji why he's asking for him specifically. Yuji would say because all of his upperclassmen had confirmed that Hakari was strong. This would annoy Hakari, as he would attempt to go in for another attack on Yuji, but Yuji would simply block it. Even still, getting hit by the attack would still hurt Yuji, pushing him back slightly. In his head, Yuji would note that Hakari's punches felt like getting hit with a serrated bat. Hakari would then yell at Yuji, asking him what makes him think that he's willing to put his life on the line for someone like him. And in order for Hakari to take such a risk like that, he would need Yuji to prove himself here and now. Prove that he has the fever to convince him. Hakari would be annoyed because Yuji came on someone else's orders and says that Principal Yaga should have weeded out weaklings like him. Yuji would then tell Hakari that he doesn't have any fever. His job as a Jujutsu sorcerer is simply to protect people, protect those who cannot protect themselves. As long as Yuji has life in his body, it will be his job to protect those that are weaker than him. Hakari would stare at Yuji and sigh, finding his answer extremely boring. He would then proceed to wind up another punch, but this time, Yuji wouldn't dodge, he wouldn't block, he wouldn't do anything. Hakari would then proceed to strike Yuji with his hardest blow yet, sending him flying across the roof into a wall. Hakari would begin to tell Megami and Panda to grab Yuji and get the hell out. But suddenly, behind Hakari, he would feel an overwhelming surge of heat. Hakari would turn around surprised and back up. He would wonder how the hell Yuji was standing after suffering a blow like that. He would ask Yuji what he was, and Yuji would simply say again, he is a Jujutsu sorcerer. His job is to protect those who are weak. And as a Jujutsu sorcerer, it's his job as well. Both him and Hakari were strong. As long as either of them has life in their body, they should protect the weak and eliminate as many curses as they can. Yuji's eyes would seemingly be staring directly into Hakari's soul. It doesn't matter what happens to him. It doesn't matter how long he has to be here. Even if he has to fight Hakari and beat him, he won't stop until he agrees. Yuji would step back up in Hakari's face and look him in the eye. Hakari would then meet Yuji's gaze and ask himself, is this the look of someone in fever? Just as he was about to prep another punch for Yuji, Kirara would interrupt him. They would ask Hakari if Yuji's fever is burning hot enough for him yet. He would sigh, but reluctantly agree, knowing that Kirara has a point, saying that the fever never lies. Hakari would then look back down at Yuji and tell him that he would agree to hear him out. Megami and Panda would be confused to as what just happened, with Kirara revealing that while they still hate the higher-ups, they recognize that Hakari's fever burned the hottest while he was helping people at Jujutsu High. With Hakari finally sitting down and listening to what they had to say, he would be surprised that Gojo was actually sealed. Panda would also note that Principal Yaga had died in a fight with the higher-up after the Shibuya incident, surprising everybody. Hakari would express that he was bummed out now that everyone who had ever taken care of him was out of the picture. Hakari would then agree to help combat the culling game, which would give Megami and Yuji a small sense of relief. However, Hakari would tell them not to get the wrong idea, and makes a point that everyone understands that this is a deal and they must return the favor in the future. With everyone in agreement, Yuji states that they need to decide who's going to go to what colony. Suddenly, Kogane would appear above Yuji and make a loud ringing noise. It would announce that a player has added a new rules to the game, allowing players to have access to information on other players. This rule would have been added by Hajime Kashimo, an elite player that was dominating Tokyo No. 2 colony. After making the announcement, Kogane would introduce itself to Yuji. Megami wouldn't understand why Yuji was already considered a player before entering the barrier colony, but Yuji would say that he believes that it has something to do with Sukuna. Megami would point out that it was still strange because Yuji had ingested Sukuna's finger of his own will, unlike past sorcerers who were in contracts with Kinjaku. As the next day would come, the group would have been unable to find the player named Angel, but apparently, they'll know when they see them. Hakari would decide that he and Panda would go to Tokyo Colony No. 2, and Yuji and Megami would go to No. 1, and Kirara would stay outside of the barrier. Hakari said he had planned to handle Kashimo himself since they were a player with the most points and is likely the strongest. At the same time, Panda would search for Angel with his nose. Yuji would say that perhaps him and Megami shouldn't travel together, but before Yuji could get another word in, Megami would tell him to be quiet and stop being so selfish. Yuji would say that he's worried about Megami, but Megami would tell Yuji that he was fine and that Yuji didn't need to worry about him. They would both go back and forth a little, until Panda would tell them to stop squabbling. The next day, everyone would reach their designated barriers in Tokyo. Kogane would then explain that inside the barriers is the lethal competition known as the culling game. It would ask the new players if they are willing to enter and declare their participation as players. Megami, Panda, and Hakari don't hesitate to agree to the operation to rescue Sumiki. Just as Yuji and Megami would be about to approach the barrier, Megami would tell Yuji that they need to be wary of incarnated sorcerers from the past era. Yuji would tell him that he understands, as some players are from 1,000 years ago. Even those from only 100 years ago have completely different mindsets than modern day people. As sorcerers, they valued life differently, and fighting to the death was a normal thing to them. Some people even desired to achieve an honorable end in battle, and Megami thinks that might be why they agreed to become players. He doesn't believe that they'll be able to negotiate with the past sorcerers, with Yuji emphasizing that they might need to be wary of cursed spirits as well. Just then, they would knock on the barrier wall to Tokyo Colony No. 1. Kogane would appear to greet them, announcing that the culling game is taking place inside, and anyone who enters will become a player in the deadly competition. Megami would declare his participation and foregoes to reviewing the rules with Kogane. As the duo would step inside of the barrier, they would be suddenly separated. Yuji would begin to fall from the sky and is confused by his circumstance. He would also be wondering where Megami had went. They didn't know that when a player enters the game barrier, they are transferred to one of 9 locations. As Yuji would be falling from the sky, one of the culling game players, known as Rin, would notice him falling from the sky. Hanyu would use her curse technique to propel herself forward, trying to ram directly into Yuji. She would smash straight through 2 buildings, an attack that would have pulverized most players. However, Yuji would have been unscathed and recovered quickly from the attack. This would surprise Hanyu, as Yuji would manage to get some footing by landing on a building, and he would take a fighting stance. Hanyu would immediately recognize Yuji's toughness and try to call her partner to her side, but Yuji, thinking quickly, would grab a rock from the rubble. With Yuji throwing the rock, it would hit Hanyu in her lower abdomen. This one attack would have seriously injured Hanyu. Just as she would realize the severity of her injury, she would begin to lose altitude and fall into a building below her. Yuji would be surprised at how easily she was defeated, but he would still need to ask about other culling games players and find Megami. Just then, Hanyu's partner would come in, using his helicopter-like curse techniques to levitate behind Yuji. With the curse user being angry, he would ask Yuji what he had done to his woman, but instead of being caught off guard, Yuji would simply calmly face his opponent and ask him if he knows about someone named Higuruma instead. Instead of answering Yuji, Haba would then begin to activate his curse technique But with Yuji thinking fast, he would pick up a stone again and throw it at Haba, as it was charged with cursed energy. However, Haba would destroy it with his fast rotating propeller. As the curse technique would stop, Yuji would take this opening to close the distance on Haba. He would run across the roof of the building and leap high into the air, allowing him to grab onto Haba's legs. Yuji would then use his strength to pull down Haba, dragging him into the side of a building. Haba would realize that Yuji was extremely dangerous and he was superhuman. Yuji would realize that he probably wouldn't be able to take on Haba outside, so he would try to lead him indoors. But Haba would have been confident that his propellers could shred everything inside. He would attempt to take Yuji head on, going straight at him with his curse technique. He would begin to spin his propellers straight towards Yuji, but just as he would reach Yuji, Yuji would use a palm strike directly on the top of his head, stopping Haba directly in his tracks. This would cause Haba to bleed heavily from his head, with Haba saying that his hand should be broken from that attack. Yuji would simply show Haba his hand and tell him that it wasn't broken. Haba would laugh. Then Yuji would immediately finish Haba with a kick. Haba would be knocked unconscious, but Yuji realizes that he needs to ask him about Higuruma. Just then, someone would appear behind Yuji and get his attention. He would say that he knows about Higuruma and ask Yuji if he remembers him. Yuji would say that he doesn't know, even though he's pretty good at remembering faces. However, Yuji would still go with him, seeing that he was confident that he could take this guy on. Rin would then take Yuji to a theater. He would say that Higuruma uses it as his base. Yuji would thank Rin and say that he would be heading into the theater. As Yuji would enter the theater, he would see Higuruma sitting in a bathtub filled with water. Yuji would find it weird, but Higuruma would say that it feels better than he expected. He would say that he doesn't care anymore about anything. He's trying stuff that he's never thought he would before. He adds that he's basically someone in their 30s going off the rails and asks if it's funny. Yuji wouldn't say anything. He'd only ask Higuruma if he could talk, but Higuruma would claim that it costs 5,000 yen every half hour. Yuji would then tell Higuruma that he's just an ally and he wants to negate the culling game. He wants Higuruma to add a rule with his points. Higuruma would stare at Yuji and tell him that he declines because he believes that the culling game presents possibilities that he's interested in. Yuji would try to tell Higuruma that the culling games was simply a ritual for sacrificing everyone in Japan, but Higuruma wouldn't believe it. Yuji would try to tell Higuruma that he just wants to save as many people as he can. Just then, Higuruma would stand up out of the tub and ask Yuji if he's ever killed someone who's angered him. As Yuji would see Higuruma with a gavel and a shikigami by his side, Higuruma would claim that it feels better than expected. Just then, Higuruma would activate his domain expansion. Yuji would simply stand there, surprised that Higuruma would activate his domain expansion so early. Higuruma would then explain that his domain forbids the use of any violence on either side, as Yuji just then would be teleported to the end of the courtroom. The Shikigami judgment would then begin to state that Yuji is under suspicion of entering a pachinko despite being underage. Yuji would simply confess and say that it was true. Judgment would reach the verdict and find Yuji guilty, sentencing Yuji to confiscation. As the domain would be dispelled and judgment would disappear, Higuruma would immediately attack by throwing his gavel, but Yuji would simply block it. Higuruma would close the distance and summon his gavel back to his hand. Charging it with cursed energy, he would increase its size and try to smash through Yuji's defense. It would hit Yuji and crash him back through several seats in the theater. As Yuji would get up, he would realize that he's lost the ability to manipulate cursed energy. Higuruma would admit that Yuji was tough for withstanding his assault so far. Just then, Higuruma would then begin to continue attacking Yuji, launching smashes down at Yuji with his gavel. Yuji would jump back and avoid the attacks. However, Higuruma would summon the gavel in his other hand, allowing him to quickly attack again. Yuji would simply dodge and block, attempting to not get hit by his attacks. Higuruma was at least a grade 1 sorcerer, so he knew that his attacks would be strong, since he couldn't reinforce his body with cursed energy anymore. Even though he couldn't reinforce his body, Yuji was still faster and stronger than Higuruma, and Higuruma could see that. Higuruma would continue to try to press the attack, but Yuji would simply dodge, block, and parry attacks. While doing so, Yuji would attempt to tell Higuruma that he just wants to protect people and doesn't want anybody else to get hurt. He has the strength to do so, so why not use it to help anybody you can? Just then, Higuruma would request a retrial. Higuruma would then begin to explain to Yuji, if he wanted to save so many people, why didn't he save as many people as he could during the Shibuya incident? So many people died because Yuji wasn't able to protect them, even though you had the strength to do so. Yuji would sit there conflicted, but then he would look up and stare at Higuruma. Yuji would then tell him that he knows he had the strength, and he knows he let people die simply because he was weak and didn't have the will to do so. He wouldn't deny it or try to make up any kind of excuse. He had the strength, he just simply didn't have the resolve, and that's why so many people died. Just then, the judgment would sentence Yuji to death. It would give Yuji the death penalty on top of confrontation. This would transform Higuruma's gavel into the executioner sword, capable of killing a target in one cut. Higuruma would then begin to go back to hand-to-hand combat with Yuji, attempting to slash him with the executioner sword. Yuji, realizing that something was different, he would simply dodge the executioner sword and refuse to get hit. He would then sweep Higuruma by the legs and kick him away. Just then, Higuruma would have been recalled of her memory because Yuji had confessed to a crime that he didn't commit. Yuji had said that he had allowed all those people to die, but that wasn't the case at all. Higuruma would then stop and deactivate the executioner sword. He would then stare at Yuji and tell him, "You tried to protect as many people as you could. The deaths that you blame yourself for aren't on you." Just then, Higuruma would deactivate his curse technique, with Yuji asking him why he did so. Higuruma would state that he remembered why he got into law in the first place, also stating that there are other weak people who also need help. So Higuruma would allow Yuji to use his points. Higuruma would then tell Kogane to add a rule to the culling game that allows players to transfer points between one another. Higuruma would then walk towards the theater exit and tell Yuji goodbye, with Yuji asking him what he's going to do now. Higuruma would tell Yuji that he wants to use his strength to help them combat the culling games, but says that he killed a judge and a prosecutor before coming to Tokyo. He feels the need to take responsibility and plans to turn himself in once the barrier opens. Yuji would nod and bow to Higuruma, thanking him for allowing him to use his points. Higuruma would simply nod and walk away. After this, Yuji would then begin to think about what he wants to do. He's not sure if he should go and look for Megami or go help Yuta. Yuji could feel the cursed energy, and he could feel that there were a lot of special grades in the Sendai colony, and Megami might be fine where he is. If anything, Yuji would help Yuta clean up the special grades, and they would all converge to where Megami was. So Yuji, having faith in Megami, would begin to head towards the Sendai colony to attempt to help Yuta. And this is where I'm going to end off part 6. I'm sorry it's short, but I promise the next one will be a lot longer than this one. I'll probably make it a bit longer because there's a lot more to be explored there. But yes, I want to thank all of you. We're almost at 1,000, so that means I can open the Discord, and I'll let you guys know when I do that. But again, I want to thank all of you for the constant support, and yeah, peace.